Hi everyone, and welcome back to Radio Gagan. It's Nik today, and I'm joined with Gagan Mahindra MP. Welcome, Gagan.
Thank you, Nick.
This is our first episode since May, and we're very excited to be back, especially with everything that's been going on lately. Today we'll dive into Gagan's experience around the recent election, from his initial thoughts when it was announced to hitting the doorsteps and that unforgettable election night. Plus we'll talk about what it was like for him to go straight into campaigning for leadership, and then how his thoughts on the new leader. And of course we'll get into the new Labour government, the budget, and how things are shaping under the leadership. Gagan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Nick. So I didn't realise it'd been since May was our last podcast, so that must have been soon after the local elections. As listeners will know, we went straight into a general election soon after, and then I went into trying to help my friend James Cleverly to be the Conservative Party leader. So while he didn't make the final hurdle, the reality is that the general election was quite brutal for my party, and I don't think I've had a bit of a rest since the last podcast, so it'd be interesting to recap on the last 5-6 months.
So Gagan, let's start at the beginning. When the general election was called, what went through your mind? Was it expected, or were you taken by surprise?
So I was in the Whip's office at the time, when we were still in government, and I was actually given a bit of a heads up in confidence that an announcement was imminent, because as a Whip I needed to be able to manage colleagues and their reactions if they were concerned or worried about the election being called in the summer rather than the anticipated autumn. So while it was still a shock to hear the Prime Minister at the time announce a general election, we all know in this country we have elections within 5 years, so while it was a few months earlier than most of us expected, we all knew it was on the short to medium term horizon.
Understandable. So moving to campaigning experience during the election, we all know that campaigning can be a very unique experience. What was it like for you in South West Hertfordshire, being on the doorsteps and meeting people face to face?
So I spent 20 years in elected office, and it's one of the few careers where you will knock on a random person's door and say, please trust me and vote for me. I actually get a bit of a buzz from that. I think every politician of whatever political stripe has to be a bit quirky and have the joy of doing that type of exercise. But politics is very much a people's industry, so if you're asked to engage with people, it should just be natural, and I think my skill set is suited to actually speaking to people and finding out what they care about, and hopefully helping their lives with some of the decisions I'm able to influence at this level.
And obviously paid off with the election. Congratulations on that.
Thank you. So I spent most, if not all, of my time in my constituency. In previous elections I would have helped out in other seats. So while I had a good grasp of what my doorsteps were saying, I was shocked when the election result came with only 121 Conservative MPs. I didn't think it was as bad as that. It definitely wasn't as bad as that on my doorsteps. So unfortunately it's democracy. I've lost a lot of good friends as colleagues, and I know several of them are still trying to find jobs in life after being an MP.
Yeah, it must be very tough. Looking at the election night is always full of emotion. Can you take us back to what it was like at the count? How were you feeling at that time?
So polls closed at 10 o'clock, and straight after 10 p.m. we went to Rickmansworth Conservative Club, which is just off the high street. I spent about half an hour there with my activists and councillors and association members, and we were in a generally good mood. While we were all shocked by the exit poll, we all thought that I was going to be okay. It was only when I got home half an hour later, 45 minutes later, that my wife immediately said, have you seen the polls for South West Hertfordshire? And both Sky and BBC were reporting that I'd lost. Now, my emotion at the time was I was resigned to the fate of what the ballot box said, because I don't think there's anything more that I could have physically done to encourage more people to lend me their support and allow me to continue as their Member of Parliament. So by the time I did get to the count, which was later that evening, the intel I had from my party professionals in the count was actually I was in an okay place. So when the actual result was declared, I think at 5:15 in the morning, everyone by that point knew that I'd likely retain my seat, including the opposition.
And was that a surprise for you?
No, because I'd been campaigning in peacetime in my whole first term, so that's and you'll know this. It's going out on weekends before an election's called. It's knocking on doors, speaking to residents, dealing with casework. It's been adding value to constituents' lives. Now, I think part of what we learned at the last general election is if you were a good constituency MP, irrespective of party politics, you were more likely to get retained. So I was a beneficiary of that. I did get lucky that there was no obvious alternative to a Conservative candidate because the Lib Dems and Labour were both claiming to be second. So if you didn't want me as the Member of Parliament South West Herts, it wasn't quite clear tactically which way you should be voting, and I benefited from that.
It's very understandable. Looking at leadership backing and campaigning, it wasn't an easy job. What was it like for you during the time after the election when you were helping cleverly for leadership?
So I've known James for years, before I became a Member of Parliament from my Essex days, and in all the years I've known him, he's always said he would not stand. And it was only after the harsh reality of life after the 4th of July general election that the Conservative Party and the potential way forward caused James to actually change his mind to say, actually, I will stand this time. I'd been urging him to stand for many, many, many years because I think he's a decent, honourable man and someone whose values I share. And that's been proven by successive leaders giving him some serious jobs in government. So once he'd made that decision with his wife to stand for leader, I left the Whip's office, or Shadow Whip's office, to be involved in his campaign, and I was his agent for the campaign. So I described the role itself as more like a team mascot. So while I was the eyes and ears in Parliament and speaking to colleagues, the benefit of supporting someone like James is everyone already knows who he was, because he'd been involved in the party for so long, both in London politics but also on the national and international scene.
How did you come to terms with backing James, and what were some key memories from his leadership campaign?
So, as I said, I've known James for years. The party is a broad church and we have a wealth of talent, and one of the things that I really admire about James, and something I try and emulate, is he's continually underestimated. If you saw his political CV and took away his name from that CV, you'd say, wow, this person's really, really impressive. But as soon as you put his name on it, it's one where people say, oh, he got there by luck. And James's response during the campaign was, I've either been really, really lucky for 16 years or I actually know what I'm doing. And he's a very humble man. He doesn't normally blow his own trumpet. And that's the type of politics that I like to be associated with. Just get on with the job. And sometimes it's in the limelight, sometimes it's behind the scenes. But actually, the role of politicians is to be effective, not loud.
I agree. And moving on to the new government. Now that Labour is in government and introduced their budget last week, how do you think they're doing so far?
What's really surprised me is how bad they've been. 14 years in opposition, you would have thought they'd had more ideas. And going back to the general election, a lot of what my conversation on the doorsteps was, given the national polls, there was likely to be a Labour government. And while their strapline was change, I think a lot of people have come to regret that change can sometimes be negative.
Right.
If you are a farmer, if you're a pensioner, if you've made the lifestyle choice to try and send someone in your family to independent school, I think a lot of the policy decisions for me don't make sense. And I think a lot of people are now having buyer's remorse if they didn't support a Conservative candidate in their constituency. I know a lot of my ex-colleagues lost by a few hundred votes here or there. So I think if there was a bit more transparency in some of their spending commitments, and we'll all remember Labour consistently saying they were not going to raise taxes, but the first budget they've had in 14, 15 years, they've raised £40 billion worth of taxes.
In all areas, yes. Any thoughts on what they're getting right now, or areas that they could improve in your personal opinion?
Well, I think the fact that Rachel Reeves is the first female Chancellor needs to be something that's recognised. I did mention that in my debate contribution yesterday. What's really surprised me about the Labour front bench is some of the Labour MPs that I know have a lot of talent, who were shadow ministers, were not put into government. Instead, Sir Keir made the decision to promote brand new MPs into either ministerial or into being government whips. And when you've got 31 colleagues who have done shadow roles, which is predominantly unpaid and under supported, not given the honour of being a government minister, I do think it's a strange political decision. There's a lot of brand new MPs. There's 650 MPs in total. I think over 250, 300, at least 300 of them are brand new. So there's a lot of new colleagues. While I know all of my side, including the 26 new Conservative members of Parliament, the Labour side is still trying to get a better understanding of each other. And I don't envy the task of the Labour whips, trying to keep such a large parliamentary group on side and loyal.
Very nice. Well, that wraps up today's episode. Gagan, thank you so much for sharing all of this with us. It's been fantastic hearing about your journey and getting your perspective on the new government.
Thank you, Nick.
And thank you to all our listeners. We'll be back with more episodes soon, so stay tuned. Until next time, take care.